Falter-Radio, der Podcast mit Raimund Löw.
Sehr herzlich willkommen, meine Damen und Herren, zum Falter-Radio für Samstag, den 29.06.2019. Präsidentschaftswahlen sind in den USA eine langwierige Angelegenheit. Wahltag ist erst am 3. November 2020. Die ersten Vorwahlen in den Bundesstaaten Iowa und New Hampshire stehen Anfang des nächsten Jahres bevor. Aber bei den oppositionellen Demokraten läuft der interne Kampf um den ersten Platz bereits auf Hochtouren. 24 demokratische Bewerber wollen Amtsinhaber Donald Trump herausfordern. Die ersten Fernsehkonfrontationen gab es diese Woche. Zu den führenden Spin-Doktoren der USA gehört Frank Luntz. Frank Luntz ist in amerikanischen Fernsehdiskussionen allgegenwärtig. Er gehört zu den Trump-Verstehern der amerikanischen Fernsehwelt. Als Berater war er für rechte Politiker in Europa und in den USA tätig. Mitte Juni hat er in Wien mit Anna Goldenberg über seine Sicht auf das gespaltene Amerika gesprochen.
This interview will come out next week when there will be the first debate with 20 Democratic candidates.
I love that. I can't wait. For me, a debate is like watching a soccer game, a football match. I'm yelling at the TV, I'm screaming. People come just to watch my reactions to what's going on because great response and I'm cheering, or, oh, you're an idiot, you just cost yourself the election. We know that somebody will emerge as the winner. I don't know who it'll be. And we know that one or two people will probably lose their campaigns because they say something stupid. That's what I love about politics, that every day something important matters.
Who would you be screaming for or against at the...
I'd take no sides. For me, it's a chance to watch the power of messaging and communication, the impact of words, and how people perceive them. It's also a chance to watch communication styles. You have some candidates that aren't even 40 years old, and you have others that are in their late 70s, and you wonder, will they fall over after 2 hours of a debate? So I don't know what to expect. I think it'll get a huge television audience. And I don't think it's just in the States. I think Europe will be watching. I think Asia will be watching, because the winner of the Democratic primary has a 50-50 shot at being president, which means the winner of the Democratic primary, it's a significant achievement politically, and it could have a huge impact globally.
So you were mentioning the different communication styles. So how do they differ among the candidates? Because there's such a diversity.
Well, you've got some like Mayor Pete from Indiana who will speak in a very plain tone. He's the openly gay, would be the first gay nominee for president ever. And he has been trending upward. Every month, his numbers go higher and higher. And this will be the first chance for Americans to see him up on a stage with other opponents. You've got the two oldest candidates, Joe Biden, former vice president, Bernie Sanders, current U.S. senator. Do they have the stamina? Do they have the passion? Do they have the emotion that younger voters are looking for? You've got Kamala Harris, the senator from California, who'd be the first female and the first African American if she were to win the nomination. You've got a lot of historic candidates here. You've got Beto O'Rourke, who is probably the most passionate of all the candidates running, and you've got Michael Bennet, who's probably the senator from Colorado, who's probably the calmest. So if you're Austrian and you want to see the widest variety of policies and presentations, next Wednesday night and next Thursday night is the time to watch. You're not going to want to watch it live because with a 6-hour time delay, it's going to be 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., and only I would be getting up at 3 a.m. to watch something like that. But I'll tell you, it will explain a lot about American politics. And the only thing that those 20 candidates are going to agree on is that they all believe they could do a better job than the current president.
And something you said earlier, you said that, in a couple of weeks, some of these candidates will have said something that will end their campaign. And I was wondering, can one predict what those things would be?
No, you can't. But I know that the former vice president lost his presidential campaign in 1988 because it was found that he delivered a speech that had been spoken by Neil Kinnock, the Labour leader of Britain, only a few months before. I know that some candidates have had horrible debate performances and their money is dried up, so nobody wants to donate to them. So you can't really predict who it'll happen to or what will be said. But American politics cannot sustain 20 candidates running. It's just too many to keep in your head, too many to be viable. So my expectation is that by September, the 20 candidates will be down to 16 or 15.
I asked you who you think who has the best chances. You said you don't really know.
Okay, I'll try to give you an answer to that. If you ask me who I think has the best chance, I'd probably choose the candidate who's in second place now, Bernie Sanders, and here's why. Some people say that he's too extreme to defeat Donald Trump, but I think that his politics, which are to the left, are actually very popular among rank-and-file Democrats right now. That he calls himself a democratic socialist, which is a positive among Democrats, that he's run before, so he's got the experience. He's willing to get rid of insurance companies, which are unpopular in the states, and have the government insure people. He speaks of a free benefit for education, which is a given here in Austria, but not in the States. And his policies very much connect to people in their 20s and 30s, which are important in a Democratic primary. So I give him an advantage. And I'd also give Kamala Harris, African-American female senator from California, very articulate, very astute, and really precise on the things that she believes in, and a message that is pretty hopeful and will connect with her audiences. So I've seen her up close, and I think the two of them are most likely to emerge over the next few months. It doesn't mean that there's any guarantee. The one thing I've learned after watching Donald Trump work his way through the Republican primaries, there are no guarantees. There are no front runners. But I would suggest to listeners and viewers from another country that those are the two candidates I'd be following.
Is there some sort of magic formula to determine what's more important, whether it's the personality or the content of what they say?
That's a great question. That's a question that they should be asking in America because they don't get into that enough. And I'm sorry to say this, and I don't believe this will make listeners happy. But in reality, in American politics, the personality is more important than the policy.
And why do you think that is?
Because Americans started engaging in televised politics a long time ago, 1960. And over time, the more important the television became, and then the more important computerization and digital became, the more important the visual became. So it's not the written word, it's the voice, as you can hear me now, and the visual that had a greater impact on what people thought of their candidates. Going back to 1960, if you watched the debate on TV, you felt John Kennedy won overwhelmingly. Mm-hmm. But if you heard the debate on radio, which a lot of people did back then, you thought Richard Nixon won. That was the difference. That was the impact of the visualization. And I'll make it more recent. In 2016, Hillary Clinton would draw a few hundred people to her rallies. Bernie Sanders would draw thousands. Hillary Clinton would come and read from a teleprompter. Bernie Sanders would deliver his speeches from paper, the old-fashioned way. She would have professionally done campaign signs that people would hold up. With the Sanders campaign, people would paint their own signs. She came across as inauthentic. Sanders came across as genuine. And a lot of that is the persona, the visualization of how they campaign. And yes, it does matter significantly.
We'll switch to the Republican Party.
Democrats are so much more interesting.
Why is that?
Because I always say to people, Democrats are more fun, they laugh louder, they drink more. You have a better time going out with Democrats. They always stick you with the check at the end of the evening. You always end up paying for their good time, but you don't mind it because they're so much more fun than Republicans are.
But wouldn't you say the Republican Party has changed? Has it changed under Trump?
I think it has changed. The Republican Party is older than the Democrats. It used to be better educated. That has changed a little bit. The most significant change now versus pre-Trump is the number of working class union members who always voted Democratic and now vote Republican. When they were voting Democratic, they were heroes because they were part of the hardworking population of America. But now that they're voting Republican, some people in the media condemn them for being low information voters. If they're voting Democrat, they're celebrated. If they're voting Republican, they're criticized. And it shouldn't be that way. There's a segment of America that quite frankly felt forgotten or ignored politically. And that accounts for much of the rise of Donald Trump. That segment who never took a government check, often worked 2 or even 3 jobs to make ends meet, do not have significant savings, but won't turn to welfare because they just won't. And they voted Republican, both because they felt that Donald Trump heard them, that he was their voice, and they also felt that they've been betrayed by the Democratic Party. And we see this same segment rising up in a number of European countries. A definable, so it's not small, a definable segment who simply feels like government has failed them, made promises to them that they could not keep or did not keep, and now they want something different.
An interesting aspect you brought up, you said that the media, when those hardworking people used to vote Democrat, they were hailed by the media, and now it's the other way. Why do you think that is?
Because the media does not like the message of Donald Trump. They don't like the policies of Donald Trump. When the working class of America is seeking greater government support, the media supports it because that's primarily their philosophy. When these people are seeking merely a fair deal, fairness, justice, and they're not asking for more government, they vote for someone who the media doesn't like. That same person is opposed. And I don't understand that. Their conditions are the same as they were in 2008 and 2012, but they voted for Barack Obama. So that was okay. Mm-hmm. But when they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton because they thought that she didn't understand them, and they voted for Trump because they thought, right or wrong, that he spoke for them, then there was something wrong with them. And we heard Clinton's famous phrase, the basket of deplorables. There's a rule of American politics, and there aren't many rules. But one of them is don't insult the voters. They don't like it. Nobody wants to be called stupid. Nobody wants to be called a deplorable. Just because you disagree doesn't mean you can be disagreeable. And she paid dearly for that statement. I believe it's one of the reasons why Trump did get elected. And even today, I don't believe that those who oppose Donald Trump understand them, including people listening now. Because if you go to New York, there's not a Trump community for 100 miles. If you fly into Washington, D.C., it's the same way. You go to L.A. or San Francisco, no Trump voters. That's where most Europeans travel to. But if you fly into Columbus, Ohio, or you fly into Grand Rapids, Michigan, or you fly into St. Louis, Missouri, drive 10 miles from the airport and you're in Trump country. It's very different than what it used to be. It's not just the suburbs. You have to go beyond the suburbs to get to areas where Donald Trump is very strong, but boy, is he strong in those places.
You said that the media doesn't like Trump, and I keep wondering to which extent. I mean, that's true. It's sort of hard to generalize about the media.
No, it isn't. In this case, it isn't hard to generalize. I asked reporters a question, and I can't do it with you because it's not fair. But I would ask reporters, of the 20 people you talk to most often, how many of them voted for Donald Trump? And because they're interviewing me, they had to answer that question. The average was 1.5. How can you say you understand the Trump voter when 19 out of the 20 people you interview, or 19 out of the 20 people you talk to, aren't voting for him? They're surrounded by people who agree with them. I would ask you, how many people would vote populist, or how many people do you know personally who are voting for the right-wing populist party? So all that I try to do is I try to say to them, come with me. Come to one of my focus groups. Let's rent a car, and instead of driving 30 minutes from the train station, let's drive an hour and 30 minutes from the train station. And then you'll get to see a part of America that you don't know. And that's why people were so surprised on Election Day. And I know the Europeans were shocked that this had happened. All they had to do was get away from the coasts and go to the middle part of the country. And they would have met Trump people everywhere.
But isn't that more like a structural problem of how the media system works, with also local newspapers being bought up?
Well, I think it's less who owns the newspaper than who writes for it. Because I know a lot of these newspaper owners don't agree with their writers. Most newspaper owners may affect the editorial page, but they won't affect the news, and that's journalism. So the Wall Street Journal is a good example. Their editorial page was criticizing Donald Trump every day. They did not want him to get the nomination. The owner, Rupert Murdoch, I don't know. He actually said nice things about Trump, but his writers didn't like him. The New York Times has never written, never in 2.5 years, a pro-Trump editorial. Are you telling me that 100% of the time Donald Trump has done something wrong? 100%? So this podcast, this publication, which everyone tells me is highly respected, they also tell me it's left of center. There are times when even someone who's left of center will agree with someone who's right of center, that the policy or the principles do align. It may not be often, but it's like a broken clock. Every 12 hours it's correct for a moment, but not with Trump. And I do think it's a problem. I don't want, and I'm concerned about this, that people now read their newspapers to affirm themselves rather than to inform. So I watch shows that I know I will disagree with to hear what other people are hearing. And I think that's important, to be willing to listen to alternative points of view. If you want to be critical of America right now, that willingness to hear the other side is very limited and very difficult.
I hear that a lot, and I guess I agree to a certain extent, but I keep wondering why. I mean, is that because of the way also Trump communicates, is very antagonistic towards the media? Does it have to do with social media? Why is it that we can't talk to each other?
I'm going to give you a formula, and I'll do it for America, and then you can apply it here if you think it applies. The first thing is that young people in the United States don't know their history, don't really know politics, don't know civics. They were never taught it, or economics. Now add to it a lack of civility that they see in the press, that they see on the streets just themselves, people being rude to each other. So civics, civility. Then add social media. The idea that you can criticize someone and you can get it all the way around the world and back. And that we seem to replicate negativity so much more than something that's positive or favorable. A negative tweet is 3 times more likely to be forwarded than a positive tweet. And then the fourth thing is really a loss of common sense, that I'm not going to treat you badly. I just know that I'm a guest in your country. So it's good common sense to know that I should be thankful and humble. We won't agree. I know one question that's coming up that I desperately don't want you to ask. I know you're going to ask it, and you have every right. I have every right to duck it. But those are the 4 attributes. Without civics, civility, and with social media and no common sense, we have some very bad ingredients that create this level of anger and hostility that we haven't seen since 1968. It's been 50 years. And I'm sorry that it's here, and I'm sorry that it's gone across much of Europe. And I believe that the politicians make it worse. And I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, enough is enough. Just stop. Don't tell me what you're against. Tell me what you're for. Make a commitment to me that you will not criticize your opponents. Focus on policy, not people. No one's done it. But eventually somebody will.
To which extent is Donald Trump a symptom or a cause of this development you just described?
I asked voters all the time, is he representative of it? Did he cause it? He's certainly a participant, as are his opponents. And I've said repeatedly that I don't find the need, even when I'm representing America, to endorse that kind of language. That is not how I was raised. If I had spoke the way he speaks, I was made to, I'm going to admit this, and I've never said this on the air, so you're going to have one cool thing from me, which is my parents took me to apologize. I said something rude about a girl in my class. I was 7 years old, and they made me apologize to her and her parents. And it was the most embarrassing moment of my life, and I never spoke that way about people again. And I wish someone had done that for these elected officials, because when you have to look someone straight in the eye and say, I'm sorry for saying that awful stuff, you never forget it. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry about that. There are good things that are happening. I love what's happening in technology. I love what's happening in automation. I think that there are many good things coming out of the U.S. I don't feel that the language of politics is one of them right now, and I'm hoping that next week I'll be proven wrong.
I'm still curious why you think that that language has changed. And
because it's not the same today that it was 10 or 15 years ago. Ronald Reagan did not communicate this way. George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton did not communicate this way. But there are names of politicians that your readers, that your listeners and your readers won't know on both sides of the aisle that use language that those people never would have used. People whose names they recognize, people who have been in this country but didn't talk the way that I think is harmful. And I see it, by the way, as bad as America is, it's still better than the United Kingdom. It's a tiny country that's tearing itself apart. And I'm afraid that other aspects of Europe may experience that if they're not careful. These are not examples we want to follow.
Do you think Trump is a fascist?
It's incredible that, and I, by the way, I don't criticize you for asking, although it's disappointing to me. I'm not surprised to hear it, because I know that in some ways what he says and how he says it alienates some people in Europe. And I'll also acknowledge that it need not be necessary, because the policies that he is pursuing are actually helpful to even some of his worst critics. And I'll give you examples. He stood up to China. Austria is being hurt by Chinese trade policies, by currency manipulation, by intellectual property theft. America is being hurt much more, but the larger Austrian companies that are doing business there are suffering. And this is a very good thing that he's doing, saying to China, if you want to be part of the global economic community, you have to act a part of it. You don't get to set your own rules. And second is the challenges over investment in security, in national security. Trump has said in a not particularly delicate way that Europe has to invest more. But he doesn't say that without doing it in America. And so you take a look, we have increased our investment, and we do provide a greater degree of economic support for the security of Europe than we have in some time. And all he's simply doing, inartfully, is saying Europe has to do more. But because we are doing more, it means you don't have to spend that money. So the criticisms of him for how he speaks to so many people justify that statement. But we know what happened here not that long ago. I'm older than I wish I was, but my grandparents remember it. And that's a really powerful word. And that's not a word I would use here. I have come out of humility to acknowledge that the U.S. needs to do a better job of demonstrating a level of mutual respect. that the U.S. needs to communicate better. But I will tell you that Vienna is one of the most popular places in America, that Americans regard Austria, even if it's not technically an ally, they regard it as a friend. And the idea that that word would be used from this country to describe the American president is sad.
Looking forward, I'm also wondering for the 2020 elections, what can the media learn from 2016 and how it was covered? I mean, you already said that you think the media just didn't look at all those Trump supporters.
They didn't see it, they
What
didn't
else?
know it, and they got it wrong. So the first thing they need to do is they need to set up shop in places where Donald Trump does have some support, so they understand why. Second is that because Trump voters are so much older than Democratic voters, this is going to sound awful, but Trump voters are dying off and Democratic voters are being born. They're registering. So Donald Trump has to find 2 million people who didn't vote for him in 2016 that will switch sides and vote for him in 2020, or he'll lose. And those have to come in states, as we've now been taught. The Electoral College is what matters. The states that will matter most are Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So that's where I'm going to study. And I'm going to study those who got a job, who didn't have one before, got a raise, who hadn't gotten one in 5 or 6 years, and see the economy is improving for them and their community. And will those Democratic voters switch and vote for Donald Trump as a result? And I'll give your readers and your listeners a factoid. In the last 100 years, not a single candidate for re-election has been re-elected when the economy has been awful. Every candidate who had a strong economy was re-elected, 100%. And every candidate but one, which is Calvin Coolidge in 1924, who no one has heard of even in America, if you had a bad economy, you were defeated, such as Jimmy Carter was in 1980, Gerald Ford was in 1976. If the economy stays this strong, it will be difficult to defeat Donald Trump. If it weakens over the next 18 months, it'll be difficult for him to win re-election. Watch the economy, and you probably know the electoral outcome.
Because you're also well known for coining the phrase climate change instead of global warming. And now, especially in Europe, you know, that's a huge issue with Greta Thunberg and Friday for Future protests. So I'm wondering what your view is on this issue, and also how it is perceived in the US and with the focus groups you study.
It's amazing that climate change is now the language that everybody uses. When I worked on it, nobody discussed it. My politics on this is a great example. My politics changed about a decade ago, but nobody reports it. Everyone knows it because I go through interviews like this. But they choose to use the politics of 18 years ago rather than 8 years ago. Climate change is clearly beyond a challenge. It is approaching a crisis, if not at that now. And you can see it from events that are happening all across the globe. And it's not the weather. It's not whether we are getting warmer or colder. It is how nature has been affected in a global way. The intensity and the ferociousness of these weather swings and the damage that they are doing. And I'm recommending so strongly to elected officials that they stop using the phrase sustainability. And here's why. Sustainability by its sound means that we can sustain our parks, we can sustain our water, our air. It's like the status quo. Sustainability to the ear is, it will still be here 20 years from now, 50 years from now. We can sustain what we have. That's not what Europeans truly want, particularly in Austria. That's not what Americans want anymore. They want a weather system. They want nature. They want the environment that is cleaner 20 years from now, safer, healthier, that they want something better than what they have. And so I've attempted with some success to work with environmental organizations to transform the messaging from let's keep the earth as it is today to let's make the earth a better place, a safer place, a healthier place going forward. And I hope that I'm successful in that effort.
So what's the buzzword instead of sustainability?
Cleaner, safer, healthier.
And do you sometimes regret introducing that phrase, climate change?
Not at the time. Absolutely not at the time, because I didn't believe it at the time. And when I made the switch reasonably publicly. And I don't understand why people haven't figured it out yet. But that goes back to the media. The media chooses not to talk about it. If the activists in this country and others in Europe adopt the idea, the concept that even if there isn't climate change, or even if it isn't significant, we're going to get cleaner air, we're going to get cleaner water, we're going to get more green jobs, we're going to get state-of-the-art technology, we're going to make life better for just about everyone on the planet, regardless of whether there is climate change. And if there is climate change, we'll actually save the planet. That's messaging that works. And I wish people would spend more time focused on the results of what we're trying to achieve, which is a healthier planet, and less time arguing over whether it's global warming or whether it's climate change. That doesn't save a life. That does nothing. Let's focus on the impact, not on the process.
To someone who doesn't know who you are and what you're doing, can you talk us through what your work looks like? So you speak to people, and then what do you do with that kind of information?
I listen to people. It's the most amazing job, and I encourage anyone who's young or youngish to do this, which is I gather groups of 10, 15, 30 people, and I listen to them. I ask them questions for 3 hours about what they dream about, what they hope to achieve, what opportunities, and what are those threats to the opportunities that they seek. And from those conversations, it helps me inform elected officials about what really matters to people and what they are trying to achieve and how these elected officials can help them. It helps corporations understand what's really going on in our minds, why we buy or why we don't, to have an impact there. It's to try to connect the decision makers and those making the decisions. And it's in my mind, and it's part of why I'm here, I really don't want the world tearing itself apart. I know the consequences of that. And the more information that we have about how people think and feel, the more that your listeners and readers get a chance to hear alternative perspectives, it won't change their minds, but at least it will explain why people feel the way that they do. And if you go back to most of our conflicts over the last 100 years, it's because we didn't understand. We made bad decisions because we didn't understand what was in the hearts and the minds of the people we disagree with. I want us to be fully informed, and I want us to be thoughtful as we make those decisions. So this is just one way to learn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sie hörten ein Interview von Anna Goldenberg mit dem amerikanischen Meinungsforscher und Berater zahlreicher konservativer Politiker über seine Sicht auf Donald Trump und auf das gespaltene Amerika. Ich verabschiede mich von allen, die uns auf UKW zuhören, auf Radio Agora in Kärnten und dem Freirad Tirol. Analysen und Reportagen aus aller Welt finden Sie jede Woche im Falter. Damit Ihnen kein Text entgeht, empfehle ich ein Abonnement. Ein Falter-Abo kann man auch im Internet bestellen. Das geht über die Internetadresse abo.falter.at. Dieser Podcast ist ja gratis. Das Falter Radio können Sie ebenfalls abonnieren, auf iTunes oder jeder anderen Plattform, über die Sie uns hören. Ursula Winterauer hat die Signation gestaltet. Anna Goldenberg interviewt nicht nur amerikanische Medienstars, sondern sie betreut auch im Podcast die Technik. Ich verabschiede mich. Bis zur nächsten Folge.
Sie hörten das Falterradio, den Podcast mit Raimund Löw.